Hi everyone, my name is Zoe Tessier and I have been an art teacher for the Art Students League. This is my 4th year, and I also teach high school art photography. This is my 6th year, so I am just going to be doing a beginner shutter speed lesson that hopefully you can use with your phone and with your DSLR camera. And hopefully you have a lot of fun with it. So I'm going to share my screen with you and just start off by showing you what the settings look like with shutter speed so you can kind of become familiar with it. So I will present this. So if you saw the last lesson under aperture that I did before, we're just going to build on top of that. But if you did not see the aperture lesson, that is okay. You can totally just start off with the shutter speed. The only reason why I was saying that is on the top part of this image, this is your aperture, okay, setting. So then below, kind of in this middle spot, this is what shutter speed looks like. So shutter speed can go up higher than 1/1000th of a second. That is how photographers describe shutter speed. It's within seconds. And it's just as I said, 1/1000th of a second. Sometimes it can go up to 1/4000th of a second, depending on what kind of camera you have or what kind of iPhone you have. So it all just, again, depends. Sometimes it goes even below half a second. Sometimes you see kind of a decimal place number where it will be 0.4 or 4 inches, it looks like. So just kind of pay attention. If your numbers don't look like this in your own settings, it is okay. But that's, again, so 1/1000th of a second, and then it goes past even half a second. And as you can see with the little action figure in this first box at 1/1000th of a second, they are totally clear, no blur in it whatsoever. And then the lower the numbers get, right? So again, in photography, what happens is it's kind of confusing to our brains at first when we see photography settings, because the smaller the number, right, the faster it will take the photograph, and the larger the number, so half is going to be larger, half a second's larger than 1/1000th of a second, the slower motion, more blur motion we're going to get in our photograph. Okay, so don't worry about anything right now. Really just kind of observe what's happening in the screen and the difference and the numbers. Don't worry about getting all of it right now. Again, you will have time to practice and hopefully understand shutter speed. So this is really how our cameras are set up with our lenses. So first, when you snap that shutter speed picture, it's going to go right through the lens. Then this is the aperture lens that we talked about in the last lesson. And then it hits this shutter, this opened shutter, okay? And then it hits the image sensor, and then it records and saves in our camera or in our phone. So go ahead and take a moment and try and find your shutter speed on your DSLR camera. It usually will be found on the top dial, and you should see a couple different letters. The TV setting is the shutter speed setting. So have fun kind of checking out your different settings on your camera if you've not done so yet. When you scroll that little dial going across, you can see what setting it actually is on the actual screen. To change the shutter speed on your DSLR camera, you have an AV button. So it's where this person's thumb is right now. But if you hold down that AV button and you scroll this dial, this little red circle over this dial, that's going to change your shutter speed. So your shutter speed's going to show up right here. So hold down the AV button with your thumb, brace the camera with your left hand, hold down the AV button with your thumb, and then move that little dial right with your finger and watch the shutter speed move in here. As far as with our phones, there are a lot of different shutter speed apps that you can use. Feel free to find the best one for you. There's a lot of reviews written on them. The app that I teach in and that a lot of the students like the most is this free app called Slow Shutter app. And it's really user-friendly in the way that once you download it for free, you can hit this little freeze guy here and you can move it back and forth, and that's going to be your shutter speed. So the slower, more dialed down this dial is to the left, to the negative, you're going to get more of a blur motion photograph, and we'll go over these terms in just a moment. And then it will also go to excuse me, okay. Sorry about that. Then it will also go to further up to the plus sign, the more freeze motion photography you're going to get and the clearer the image is going to be. So there are other apps that you can use for shutter speed. A lot of them are just used, I've seen kind of universally or universal, that it's kind of a sliding scale left to right that you can change the shutter speed. So just pay attention to 1/500th of a second, 1/4 of a second. That is the look of shutter speed. Okay, so maybe you have an app already downloaded, ready to kind of try out right now during this tutorial. But if not, go ahead and maybe try and start with that Slow Shutter app and just play with the dial with a couple different landscapes. Or if you want one really fun thing to practice shutter speed with at home, if you have nothing that's moving in front of you, is you can just turn on the kitchen sink, and that running water usually gives you a pretty good idea of how your shutter speed is working. So try shooting with the water running at a really low shutter speed. Okay, so that low is going to be 1/2 second versus a really high shutter speed that's going to be 1/4000th of a second. So once again, we're just going to look at these pictures and try and just kind of absorb all the information, and then hopefully you can have a moment to go out and take some pictures. So at 1/60th of a second, the skateboarder here is in this blurry looking image, and then he just becomes even more focused the higher that shutter speed is. And some of you may have seen like really famous photographs of these beautiful long strings of light going along the highway that photographers take. And it is very, very easy to take something like that. I don't mean to, put it down too much, but sometimes I feel like I see those pictures and sometimes in my mind, I'm just like, oh, they're just at a really low shutter speed to grab those photographs to capture that, but it looks very advanced and technical. When in hindsight, it's not too advanced. You can definitely do it. It's just by using the correct shutter speed. So at 1/200th of a second, there's going to be less light, right? The image comes in and out of that sensor really, really fast. You might have a darker image and you're going to have a crisper motion photograph. And at 1/10 of a second, you're going to have more light, right? The shutter speed is open for longer. It's going to be a lot brighter because it's going to let more light in. And it's going to be that blurrier motion photograph. So with this shutter speed at 1/1000th of a second, you're going to see little droplets of water versus like you're going to see kind of this freeze droplet picture of all these little water droplets falling versus the shutter speed at 1/15th of a second, where you're going to see kind of this fuzzy fountain water. And some people really love that beautiful kind of fuzz motion look when photographing lights or water or animals or runners or whatever it is, whereas some people really like seeing a really crisp image. So again, I just want to prepare you to set your shutter speed correctly. So when you go out and try and take a photograph for shutter speed, it's set correctly that the minute that that person flies by or the minute that you see this fountain and you want to hurry and snap a picture, your shutter speed will be ready to go. So this would be one of those moments that hopefully you're not dropping a bunch of bottles and trying to get this photograph. Hopefully you can have your shutter speed set at the right time. And in order to get this sort of photograph with kind of these freeze motion pieces in there, so you're going to have a really high shutter speed, right? So this might be 1/1000th of a second. And we call it freeze because everything's frozen in motion. So again, these are very technical photographer terms. This is another freeze motion photograph. So I'm sure this photographer was ready to go, ready to take that picture at a high shutter speed. Okay, so maybe you go to a horse show or some game or activity. Again, I just want to give you the tools that will provide you the skills to be able to shoot a photograph like this. So technically we'd say this is a freeze motion photograph, right? There's no blur in it, and it's at a very high shutter speed. This is going to be a freeze motion photograph. Again, these vehicles look like they're not even moving, okay? So that shutter speed is so high that you kind of have to decide then if you want maybe a little bit of motion in there to kind of show that they're moving. Otherwise, some people might question if you're showing us more aperture or if you're trying to show some sort of action. So in this sort of photograph, it's the perfect example of when you decide maybe setting your shutter speed a little bit lower so you see some action and some movement in your photograph. So for example, with this one, this photographer has decided to do a little bit of the blur motion photograph to kind of show the speed of those wings with the bird. If you did take the aperture lesson before this, you can now combine the two settings. You can combine a lower aperture, so maybe a 2 or a 1.4 f-stop, and then you can combine it with a shutter speed of maybe 200 or 250 of a second. Okay. So again, here we have a blur motion photograph where we would know that if you did a really high shutter speed and everything was frozen in here, that these kids are still moving. It's not like those vehicles that are completely stopped where you're kind of wondering if they're moving or not. These kids on swings or whoever's on a swing, we know that there's movement. So it's really your decision if you want to capture some of that blur and where you want to capture the blur. So again, I want you to be able to look at any photograph and know what setting was used. So in this one, we're going to say it's not that high of a shutter speed. The reason why these kids are blurry in the foreground, so the closest thing to us, is because the aperture is lower. So again, if you've taken that aperture lesson tutorial with me, we're kind of combining the two. If you want to replicate an image like this, if you're just in it for the shutter speed, that's great. Just pay attention to which part you want to actually be in focus, or if you want a little bit of blur motion photography in there. So this image always kind of makes me a little bit dizzy. But the way that you would take this is you're going to use a lower shutter speed and you're going to be moving with the object. Another blur motion photograph. Again, you'd want to be really fast and ready with your shutter speed. It would be wild to catch an image like this. And if you are going into the grocery store and going in at high speed, maybe you're rushing around to get those last minute party snacks. Looks like a fun cart down here with the cupcakes and maybe the chips and the Mountain Dew. Wow, it's going to be a wild night. Maybe you do take off in the grocery store and you just try going down one aisle and kind of moving fast. Have your shutter speed set low so you do get this kind of blur motion photograph, and you might get some sort of image like this. So I have students and people just doing a exercise of shutter speed just to understand it. It's totally up to you if you want to do something similar to this where you set the highest setting shutter speed on your app or on your DSLR camera, which may go up to 1/4000th of a second. It may just go to 1/1000th of a second, but shoot from the very highest setting and then shoot from the very low setting, which here we have 1/4 of a second. So when you shoot from the highest, lowest of the highest, and you kind of shoot in between and you go back and review your pictures, it makes a lot of sense kind of seeing how it goes from blurry to focus just by practicing those different shutter speed settings. So at this point, you have a lot of knowledge on how to actually shoot with shutter speed, but I want you to be able to take this into the next level of actually, not only just practicing shutter speed, but where do you go with it? What do you do when you get a really cool picture of someone bike riding or someone jumping or a water shot? So this is really just to kind of push you into that next level and really get a really cool photograph. So I do this assignment with a lot of my students. Have done this with the adult students also at the Art Students League taking the photo course. And I call it street photography. It's an interesting way to kind of observe through your lens. And so I'll just show you some slides. So first of all, when we're walking, and maybe being an artist, you're really observant and you notice all of this without your lens. But a lot of the time when we snap a black and white photograph or any photograph out on the street photography, we catch more details once the picture has been taken. And it sometimes turns out very different than we actually thought it looked from a glance. So I want you to, I'll go through kind of a little fun assignment that you can try at home, but I want to talk about how to change your filters on your phone. And you can't change a filter on your DSLR camera, but I'm going to do a quick demo on how to change the filter in Photoshop with your image. So if you do go onto your phone and you go to your camera app, if you snap a picture or you use any photographs, I'm just going to use an old one that I have. So I'll do one of my dog and I there. If you hit edit on the bottom, it's right next to the little trash can. And I'll exit out of this. I'll come back to it. So I'll go back. I'll hit cancel. Okay, so I'm just going to find any photograph in my phone. And I'm going to hit edit next to that trash can. You're going to see in the very middle, there's 3 little circles overlapping. Those are going to be your filters. So go ahead and click on your filters. And you can scroll back and forth. And you can easily change a photograph to black and white. Okay. So it's really simple to change your photographs, and there's definitely different moods with the filters, and our phones are so amazing these days that we have options for filters. So give it a shot. If you want to change it to black and white, that's how you're going to do it on your phone. In an actual photograph that's going to be on your desktop, I'm going to share my screen with you. So I'm going to find, I'm going to pull up Photoshop. You can download Photoshop on your computer. You can do like a free session with Photoshop and just kind of click around and see if you like it. I believe it's $9.99 a month if you like it and you want to use the program. I use it for everything as an artist, so you might find it a helpful tool. If it's not just for photography, you can use it for other things. But I have a photograph on my desktop, my color fruit photograph, and I'm just going to pull it into Photoshop to change it into black and white. So I'm going to say open, and it's right here. So I can go ahead and just already open up this fruit photograph in here, and then underneath you're going to have a couple different tabs here that you can click on. Learn is awesome in Photoshop. It tells you a bunch of different tutorials and things with Photoshop. Libraries, and then adjustments. Under adjustments, it's the same tools that we could kind of use in a darkroom way back in the day when we used darkrooms with photography. But if you go to this second row, this middle row, you're going to see a little box that has black and white, half and half in it. And that's going to immediately change the photograph to black and white. And then you can go ahead and actually lighten the things that are red. So that strawberry was red, so I just changed the red sliding scale here. The yellow might change a little bit in that lime because it has more yellow in it. Okay. So it's amazing the technology that we have these days with Photoshop and our computers. So it's just a fun trick to use on our computers. If you're using, again, that DSLR camera and it's come out in color and you want to change it to black and white, I would use Photoshop for it. You can also Okay, I'm not going to do that. It's now playing with different settings, so I will skip that. But I'm going to jump back into our slideshow presentation. And so just to kind of repeat myself one more time, try and always get your shutter speed setting set correctly before you shoot anything moving. So if you know a bike race is happening and they're going to be going really fast and you want it to be that freeze motion, perfectly crystal clear motion photograph, then you're going to go ahead and set that really high setting. For this one, for example, the photographer knew that train was going to be whipping by. They wanted a freeze motion, so they're going to have a lower shutter speed setting. So just a great photograph. This photographer looked like maybe they were kind of watching people jump over this puddle. So it's just beautiful. The lighting, the freeze motion, how her feet are kind of lifting off from that back foot and barely landing on this other foot. So this is the assignment that I was just talking about just a minute ago. So try and track where you go or write it out and do a little map of what you do and who you might see on a daily basis, and then go out and take photographs of those people. They can either know that you're taking a picture of them, or maybe they don't know. So maybe you go to Starbucks every morning, you see the same group of people in Starbucks behind the counter, and you know what they look like inside and visually to you, but try and maybe snap a picture of them and see if it's any different than what you thought they looked like or what they were doing. And this was actually a photograph that was taken from one of the photography students, that they saw this gentleman working at a 7-Eleven every day, and when they actually took a picture of him, the results came out very different in the way that they thought of him in kind of one way, and then when they got this picture of him, he looked very gentle and kind. And it's just interesting how we catch things in a lens and how it looks different sometimes. So try it out. If you're really looking for something to take pictures of with shutter speed, try doing your map and kind of walking through it and see what you come up with. So this was someone's grandfather. They lived with them, and they always thought their grandfather looked a certain way, and then they took a picture and they looked a little bit different. So shutter speed can be applied to this, again, if the person's moving really fast or they're not moving very fast at all. You get a little bit of this blur in the background. So have fun with your settings. You can also use yourself as a subject. So this woman's name is Cindy Sherman. She's a famous photographer, and she actually dresses herself up and takes pictures of herself. So again, if you're looking for a subject, you can dress up. Cindy Sherman dresses up in all these different outfits and plays these different roles and is super famous. So maybe play with it a little bit. You can get a tripod for your camera. I have one for my iPhone. They're really fun to use. They're awesome. You just hit your settings and you go under your timer and set it for the correct timer. Try and get the correct shutter speed. So either you have blur motion or freeze motion. This one's more freeze motion. And then you can go even more into staged photography, where you can practice that shutter speed. So famous photographer Jeff Wall, this is one of his photographs. It is staged, but it looks like it's a little bit more natural in setting because, of course, the wind and the papers are going flying. So you can always set it up. And you can always challenge yourself by going through images on the internet. If you look up shutter speed photographs, and figure out what you like about the actual photograph, and then you can take that and put your own spin on it. So maybe you love the colors in the photograph, or you love the expressions that are seen in the photograph, or the movement, or the story behind it, and then you can recreate your own shutter speed photograph. And last, I would love for you to think about really where you can take your artwork. So where can you submit your photographs so it can be seen, and you never know how far it will take you. It could bring you to the front of a magazine, it could take you to National Geographic, Sports Illustrated magazine, who knows where it would go. But one of the sites I do use is this call for entry sites where it asks for a lot of artists to submit their artwork. There is a photography section. You could submit some of your stuff. So just think about that, where it could go. And just another cool one in there showing that freeze motion photography versus that blur motion photography. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I wish I could answer some of your questions if you had any, but please watch this video again if you have any questions, and always remember to have fun creating your artwork. And I hope you enjoyed, and take care.